Hello everyone, my name is Ziamaro and welcome to Battlerites Sage. It's finally time to bite the bullet and do the Poloma guide. Normally when I'm writing out notes for a video they're like 2 or maybe 3 pages long. This one is 6. 6! There's just so much to cover. I'll start out by saying a couple of things. First, Poloma is a very flexible champion. There are so many ways of playing her, and I'll try and cover multiple playstyles, but I'll focus mostly on my personal playstyle. Secondly, there's a growing consensus that Poloma is overtuned. She honestly has an absurdly high pick rate, both in high-ranked solo queue and in tournaments. So the chances of a nerf coming pretty soon are high. The good news though is that Stunlock have a very light touch when it comes to nerfs, so I'm not super worried about her being nerfed into obscurity. So, with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into battle rights, because I know that's the first question most people will be asking. Poloma has so many viable battle rights, so it's actually quicker to say which battle rights aren't useful. So, Spirit Walker, Soul Theft, and the ultimate battle rights should almost never be picked. Obviously, take a look at them, and if you like them, then you're welcome to try it. But myself, and if you look at any high-ranked Poloma, you won't see them take these. Next we have the situational category. This includes Dark Souls, Ghostly Strike, Soul Essence, Direwolf, and Pixie Dust. All of these have their uses, and I'll go into those in a bit, but they don't make up the core build for Poloma. And finally we have the core battle rights. Let's start with Shimmering Bond. This is, in my opinion, a must pick for 3v3. It increases the healing done by your spirit link from 50% to 70%. It might not sound like a lot at first, but in practice, it changes your linked heals from 4 per hit to 6, which is insane. Not only does this allow you to deal with pressure on multiple allies, it also means significantly higher self-healing. To put this into perspective, if all 3 of you need healing and you're all linked, each left click will heal for 20, and there's no cooldown. There are very few times in 3v3 where this wouldn't be useful. One time you might not take it is if you're playing a super aggressive comp where you mitigate damage through offensive pressure. Then you might avoid this battle right. Equally, in tournament play and very high level pre-mades, people might focus one person at a time, and in that case, Shimmering Bond might not be so useful. It's also not particularly good for 2v2, but other than that, take this battle right because it's really good. Next, let's have a look at Spectre. I always take this one. Not everyone does, but most people do. The value of the invisibility on other side is quite hard to quantify, but the fact you or your teammate can reposition while invisible is amazing. I take this in every situation, and so do many other Polomas. Third, let's have a look at Phantasm. This is another one that I and many other Polomas take in every situation. This makes your space reduce damage on allies by 40% and increases damage by 25% on enemies. I tend to use it defensively more often than not, but if an enemy wastes all their cooldowns and I have my space, I'll often put it on them to make the most out of that burst window. Defensively, it's incredibly strong. I've already mentioned how great Poloma's healing output is, and the fact that you can fully mitigate damage for an ally through other side is really strong. But when your other side is on cooldown, you'll be glad you have Phantasm. If your ally gets stuck in an ultimate, being able to reduce the damage by 40% is really powerful. Going back to one of the other side rights, Into the Realm is a common pick. I take Into the Realm over Shimmering Bond in 2v2. The extra healing when you come out of other side is great, especially as it works in an AoE, plus it reduces the cooldown of other side by 1 second. I see a lot of high ranked Polomas run this in their 3v3 build, but I skip it in favour of other battle rights. Vengeful Spirit. This is a really common pick. It makes your space reset your fear. So when you're against melee, this is really strong, because it gives you an extra self-peel and extra healing when you use your shift Q. One time when you definitely shouldn't take this is against a full ranged comp though. A ranged character should never willingly walk into your fear range. The chances are, if you want to land a fear on a ranged character, you have to space to them to begin with, which means you're not getting any value out of this battle right. But against double melee or triple melee even, I always take this. Spiritual Wind is another great battle right. It increases your movement speed by 40% for 3 seconds after fearing, and it works whether you hit the fear or not. This is another one that's great against melee comps. Even if the enemy doesn't trigger the fear, you can kite them with the speed boost. One thing to be wary of is that if you cast while it's active, you won't get much out of it. So stop casting if you need to reposition with the speed boost. Silver Fang is a crazy strong right. It increases the range of your wolf by 20%, and it increases the first hit damage by 4. This is particularly strong when you're with or against ranged champions, because it allows you to stand at the back healing while still putting out some offensive pressure. If you manage to get all 3 bounces from the wolf, then you'll deal 52 damage per cast, which is crazy. 50% of my damage usually comes from the wolf, so I almost always take this one. Finally, we have Affection. This isn't a necessity, but I tend to take it more often than not. We have a very ranged heavy meta right now, so you don't always get to use your shift Q on enemies for self-healing. Affection gives you some self-healing against full range comps, and on top of that you get 5% extra energy when the wolf comes back. One wolf plus a mouse 1 will give you 25% energy when you have Silverfang and Affection, which is insane. So for that reason I usually put this in my build, but not everyone does. One time I would skip this right is against double melee. So what's my build? My main rights for 3v3 are Shimmering Bond, Spectre, and Phantasm. I always take those 3. I take Silverfang 90% of the time, and then I take Affection against double ranged or Vengeful Spirit against double melee. One time that I'll swap out Silverfang is against very sticky melee comps, or when there's a lot of melee on both sides. In those situations, I play much closer to the fight, so I'll take Spiritual Wind for the extra movement speed. My 2v2 build is basically the same, but I swap Shimmering Bond to Into the Realm. My build isn't the be all and end all, it just fits my playstyle. With Poloma, you can't really go too far wrong by just mixing up any of the core battle rights that I've mentioned, so just fit the rights to your personal style. As far as the situational rights go, Direwolf and Dark Souls are great when you're playing a super aggressive divey comp, and Pixie is great if you want a little more healing and damage burst. Ghostly Strike makes your space knock back pretty fast, so that can be great against melee who are tunneling you, and I'm not overly keen on Soul Essence at higher ranks, but it's also good against tunneling melee. I just think there are better picks. Okay, with the battle rights out of the way, let's move on to positioning. Your positioning depends a lot on who you're playing with. In general, you want to play slightly behind your ranged teammates. Try to stay in healing range of your melee teammates if you can, but if you maintain a defensive position, you can probably just use other side if they overextend and need help. One time when I hold a more aggressive position is when I have 2 melee on my team. In this case, I play a lot closer to the fight because if I need peels, I need to be close to my teammates. My personal philosophy when it comes to positioning as Poloma is to take cues from my team. If they play aggressive, then I play aggressive with them. If they back off, then I back off too. I think this is a good philosophy for any support. Let your team decide the flow of the battle. Even when my team plays excruciatingly passive, I'll just pump out heals and apply offensive pressure with my wolf and peel with my fear. There's no use trying to lead an assault as a support character. You'll probably just end up dying against good players. Equally, if your team plays hyper aggressive, try to keep up with them. Always maintain a good position relative to the fight, but stick with your team. As a support, you've really just got to amplify whatever your team does. Luckily, that's something that Poloma really excels at. If you need a heal bot, she's one of the best. And if you want to play aggressively, then she's great at that too. Personally, I think a defensive Poloma works better. Don't get me wrong, you can play an aggressive Poloma, but the chances are you'll end up having to use your other side on yourself a lot more. This is okay in 2v2, but in 3v3, other siding your team is one of the things that makes Poloma so strong. So try to save it for your teammates if you can. If you want to see a great aggressive Poloma though, check out Mini on Twitch. I actually watch him a lot myself, and he's a master of knowing when to play aggressively and then when to play back and save his other side for his team. So if you're wanting to learn how to play an aggressive Poloma, then definitely check out Mini. Next, let's have a look at Poloma's cooldowns. I've already mentioned using your other side to save your teammates, but when should you use it exactly? Generally, it's best to save it for telegraphed attacks where you'll get guaranteed value. If you or your team is stuck in an ultimate, use it. If your ally's about to get in-cap slammed by Bacco, then use it. If someone gets stunned by Croak, use it. While you're still learning Poloma, try and save other side for these kind of things because you'll get guaranteed value out of it. The more advanced use for other side is counting ally cooldowns. This requires really good game sense and it's what gives Poloma her high skill cap. Let's give you an example. Let's say your Shifu harpoons into the enemy team. He does a few attacks, they hit his counter, he's still invulnerable. When he comes out, he pops his fleet foot. But when he comes out of that, he has nothing. So at that point, he can be quite vulnerable. This doesn't mean you should pop your other side right away, but keep a close eye on him. Right before he gets heavily focused, pop other side. A good Shifu will usually run back at this point, and by the time he comes out of other side, he has all his cooldowns back, so heal him up and repeat. Try not to confuse yourself early on, but once you're around Diamond, this is something to work on. It's what separates the good Polomas from the best ones. It's something I personally have a grasp of, but I'm by no means a master. There are so many other things going on in the game, so using your other side like this comes secondary to everything else. You need to heal your team, you need to peel for yourself and others, and you need to apply offensive pressure. Once you have those things down, it's time for some crazy other side plays. Next, let's have a look at space. The best general advice I can give is to just use your space as a big heal. 16 healing is pretty awesome, and the hitbox on the projectile is huge, so it's easy to hit. Eventually you'll want to time it before big damage for the 40% damage reduction from Phantasm, but even just using it as a big heal is great. The second use for space is the iframe it gives you. Because the iframe comes after the cast, you'll need to have it set up already to avoid something most of the time. That's another reason I like to use it as a heal. If it's already on someone and then you need the iframe, you've already got it ready to recast. And then we have the EX space. This one is tricky to get right, so be careful when using it when you have melee on your team. It can be hard enough as a melee to stick to the enemy without your healer messing with you. The great thing about EX space though is that it gives both you and your teammate an iframe. It's hard to pull off, but a good example is just before a croak ult pops, you swap with one of your teammates, which will mitigate damage for both of you. It also heals both of you a decent amount, so it can be used as a self-heal from time to time. Just be mindful not to screw up your teammates' plays. Now let's have a look at the fear. Paloma's fear is her main self-peel, and the shift Q is one of her main self-heals. When to use the EX version is kind of simple. If you need healing, use shift Q. If you don't, use regular Q. In many respects, you should treat your fear a lot like how other champions treat their counter. Just like other champions rely on getting their counter hit, you need to have your fear triggered. If you miss it, then you're in big trouble against good players. There's a huge amount of mind games surrounding the fear, which depends a lot on the rank you're playing at. So the best advice is to just play mindfully, observe how your enemies tend to play, and if your fear's not getting triggered regularly, you might need to change up your timing a bit. Try to use it unpredictably. Against good players, sometimes even holding onto it for a long time can throw people off. A lot of melee won't fully commit to attacking you until it's on cooldown. As far as the wolf goes, just make sure you hit it. The bulk of your damage as Poloma will come from the wolf, so it's really important to hit it every time if you can. You can also use it to steal the orb because it has a really long range with the rights and it does reasonable damage. One other thing is that you can use the orb to guarantee the first bounce. Just be a little bit careful because each bounce can trigger counters. So if you get the first bounce on the orb, but then you end up triggering all the counters, it's not really worth it. Honestly, there's not much more to say about the wolf, just make sure you hit it and don't hit counters. Pixie is an ability that I personally make frequent use out of. One thing to be aware of though is that you get no energy while using Pixie. However, if I can guarantee value out of the Pixie, I'll always use it. For example, if my team's taken a reasonable chunk of damage, I'll pop it to mitigate as much damage as possible. When you pop Pixie and just pump heals into people, you can outpace a lot of damage, so it's great at preventing your allies from going beneath the magic 40 HP mark. If you're not sure what I mean about this 40 HP thing, then go check out my other video about recovery health. I almost always use Pixie defensively, but if an enemy's out of cooldowns and they're in a bad position, I'll usually pop it. When I do use it aggressively, I'll usually try and combo it with an offensive Phantasm space. With the 25% damage buff, you can do some crazy damage for a support. Finally, we have the ultimate. Because of the long wind up before it does its big damage, it can be quite hard to get offensive value out of it. But the way you use it offensively is kind of the same as any other champion. Just watch for the enemy using all their outs and then place it on them. If you have a Freya on your team, the Thunderclap pull is incredible for pulling enemies back into your ultimate. And the same thing goes for any other champion that can pull. The Fading Snare on the first tick is also really good for zoning enemies. But more often than not, I'll use Paloma's ultimate for the iframe. And it's a pretty long iframe too. If I'm all out of regular cooldowns and I'm about to take a snipe to the face, I'll pop my ultimate to avoid it. I have played against Palomas who have great timing on their offensive ultimates, but the vast majority of Palomas that I come up against seem to use it for the iframe more often than not. Finally, let's talk about when to heal and when to play aggressively. Your default setting in 3v3 should be healing. If there's healing to be done, then you should be healing. But if there's no healing to be done, then feel free to do damage. As long as your positioning is solid, quite often you'll find yourself casting constantly as Poloma, so you can usually do a bit of both. At the start of every round, after we get to the middle, I usually link my allies together with my mouse 1. That way, if one of them dives into the enemy team, I can often still heal them by pumping heals into the other teammate. If I've got nothing else to do, I usually just refresh the spirit link, so it's quite good to have it up at all times. When it comes to the wolf, I tend to just use it on cooldown. I'm always careful not to trigger counters, so sometimes a fake cast or two can be helpful, but generally just use it as much as you can and try to hit it. In 2v2s, Poloma plays a little more like a DPS. So in terms of positioning, you should position a bit more like a ranged DPS would, but quite often you'll prioritize damage a little more than you would in 3v3. My best tip for what to focus on in 2v2 is just to hit the same person that your ally is. As far as healing goes in 2v2, I tend to rely a bit more on the other side and the fear for damage mitigation rather than raw healing output. I have to be honest though, if you want to get the most out of Poloma, you should really be playing 3v3. Don't get me wrong, I do like 2v2, but I think there are other strong picks for 2v2. The thing is though, is that Poloma completely defines the meta in 3v3 right now. So if you're looking to climb as Poloma, I would definitely recommend playing 3v3. Honestly, if you're a Poloma main like myself, I would brace yourself for some nerfs in the next patch, but regardless, I think she'll continue to be a great champion. Perhaps they'll nerf her ability to play so passively and pump out crazy heals, but if that happens, all of us Poloma mains will probably just switch to a more aggressive style. And who knows, maybe changing up the meta a little bit will be more fun for everyone, including the Polomas. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more Battlerite guides, news, and discussion. And if you want to see me play Poloma, I'll be streaming on Twitch tonight from 7:30 GMT, so tune in to twitch.tv/BattleRiteSage. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.